Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Kline. Contrary to what my name on the Zoom thing says, I need to change it. And I'm the Assistant Rector here at St. Paul's, and we are so excited to welcome two of our confirmation class graduates, Livi Stites and Louella Whitaker. And a couple weeks ago, I asked them, I said, hey, would you be interested in coming and speaking to our adult forum, kind of sharing some of what you learned in the confirmation class and doing a little bit more continuing ed? And they were gracious enough to be willing to do that, which is pretty amazing given all the homework that they have right now and juggling doing school online. And so it just shows you how passionate they are about the issues we're going to be talking about today. One of the things we covered in our confirmation class quite a bit was talking about the history of the church and race and kind of what does it mean as Christians to be involved in, social activism as people of faith. And part of that was going and looking at church history and looking at major saints throughout church history who, were inspiring. And so with that, I give it up to Livi and Louella to introduce themselves and to start their part of the presentation.
Okay, so I'm Louella, and so I was gonna say something similar to what you said, but Livy and I are in the choir together, and then we were also in the confirmation class, and then I was just gonna say kind of the similar thing about how we learned about in confirmation about social justice and how that connects to the faith, and so this was a chance to learn about one of like the pioneering leaders of that, and Paulie was kind of ahead of their time, but yeah. Livy, do you want to say something before I start the biography?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to be talking about Paulie Murray today, and they were really interesting to learn about, and they connected a lot to what we learned, like Louella and Dan have both said, about confirmation and faith and how those two connected. So pretty excited to show you some of the things we found.
Yeah, okay, so we're going to start with just a biography, and I'm going to share my screen for some pictures of Paulie that go along with it. So tell me if you can see it. Wait 1 second. Okay, can you see it? Okay, so Paulie Murray was a civil rights activist, pioneering feminist, a labor organizer, a lawyer, an Episcopal priest and saint, and a poet. Murray was born Anna Pauline Murray in Baltimore. Murray's mother died when Murray was just 3 years old, and just 10 years later, Murray's father was committed to an asylum where he was murdered by a guard. Orphaned at a young age, Murray went to live with their aunt and namesake, Pauline Fitzgerald, in Durham, North Carolina. After graduating from Hillside High School in 1926, Murray moved to New York to attend Hunter College. It was at this time and throughout the 1930s that Murray's struggles with gender and their expanding view of gender itself became central to their life. Murray changed their birth name from Anna Pauline to Paulie. After college, Murray earned a JD from Howard University Law School. The only woman in her class, Murray was valedictorian and awarded the Rosenwald Fellowship, an award which previous graduates had used to attend Harvard University. Despite winning the fellowship, Murray was rejected from Harvard due to their gender, echoing previous rejections based on race, sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity that Murray had experienced. Instead, Murray went to the University of California, Berkeley, to receive a Master of Law degree. Murray later became the first African American to receive a JSD from Yale Law School. Murray played an important role in the civil rights movement. They worked to end segregation, and in 1940, they were arrested for refusing to give up their seat on the bus. This was almost 15 years before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus in Montgomery. Murray joined with Bayard Rustin and other civil rights activists to form CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. Murray also provided language used by Thurgood Marshall and others in arguing their case in Brown versus Board of Education. In addition to being a civil rights leader, Murray paved the way for many future feminist leaders and activists, including Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ginsburg credits Murray with inspiring a brief she wrote for the historic court case of Reed v. Reed and articulating the arguments for expanding the Equal Protection Clause to include women. So this is just a small clip of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then there's a longer video that we can watch later.
It's her.
The 14th Amendment contains my favorite clause of the Constitution, nor shall any state deny any person the equal clause. Paulie had the idea that we should interpret the text literally. It said any person, not any male person. She wrote this remarkable article called Jane Crow and the Law, where she called attention to all the laws that restricted what women could do. Reed v. Reed was the turning point gender discrimination case in the Supreme Court. I wrote the brief in Sally Reed's case. I put on the cover Paulie Murray's name. By the time of Reed, Paulie had already changed her interest. She was going to divinity school. She was into ministry, not lawyering. But we knew when we were writing that brief that we were standing on her shoulders.
Yes, that's not.
Murray served on many organizations, including the National Organization for Women, NOW, which they co-founded with Betty Friedan in 1966. Not only was Murray way ahead of their time in the civil and women's rights movements, but they were forward-thinking in their views on gender, describing themselves as a girl who should have been a boy. Murray tried without success to go through hormone therapy, and although Murray did not identify as lesbian, they nevertheless had a lifelong partner with a woman named Irene Barlow. The picture is not Irene Barlow, it's actually Eleanor Roosevelt with Paulie, and they were close friends, so that's clarifying that. And then, okay, Murray wrote extensively about their experiences as a Black woman and the need for connection between race, gender, and sexuality. They wrote Proud Shoes, the story of an American family, an autobiography which talked about how racism and oppression had affected their family. Murray died of pancreatic cancer on July 1st, 1985. Since their death, Murray has been named a saint by the Episcopal Church. Yale has also named a building after the saint, and Murray's childhood home in Durham, North Carolina, is now under protection of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. In recent years, Paulie Murray has begun to get more of the recognition that they deserve, and there is even a recent documentary about Paulie Murray, produced by the same producers who produced RBG. While in their 60s, sorry, I think the slides got skipped around, but while in their 60s, after the death of their partner, and even though a tenured professor at Brandeis, Murray decided to go to divinity school at General Theologic Seminary. In 1977, Pauli Murray became the first African-American woman in the US to become an Episcopal priest. Murray decided to devote their life to their Christian beliefs and worked in a parish based in Washington, D.C. until retirement. This is what our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, had to say about Pauli Murray.
Rights.
Long before, almost 10 years before, Rosa Parks sat down and refused to give up her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Pauli Murray sat down on a bus and refused to give up her seat, refusing to sit in the segregated section. She anticipated movements that would come years later. She sowed the seeds for change that would eventually happen. It was Pauli Murray who produced the seminal study of segregation laws throughout the United States that formed much of the basis for the legal work of Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund that went into the case of Brown versus Board of Education. Paulie Murray did most of that legal research on civil rights, on segregation laws that needed to be overturned. That was Pauli Murray. She anticipated change that would impact both civil rights, but women's rights, and eventually LGBTQ rights. She anticipated all of those things in her legal work, in her legal writings. Her friendship with the late Eleanor Roosevelt was a friendship that was built on a mutual commitment to values of a humane and a decent world. She worked assiduously for that kind of world, even though she herself did not actually see it. She wrote and worked for the equality of women and for equity. In fact, there's a new commentary, a new article I saw the other day that has Ruth Bader Ginsburg referring to Pauli Murray as one of her heroines, if you will, in the struggle and in the work.
Wow, wow.
She's an unsung hero for the rights and the equity of women, an unsung hero for the rights and the equality and equity of all people in this country, an unsung hero for the rights of LGBTQ people in this country. She anticipated it. She saw it before it happened, and she worked for something that she would never see, but she did it so that some of us might actually see it.
That's wow.
Okay, the state was ahead of their time in many ways and laid down a foundation for us in the ongoing fight against racism and sexism, not only as people, but especially as Episcopalians.
Wow. That's so amazing.
Okay, so Pauli Murray was also a poet and wrote a lot of poetry in their free time. So I'm going to screen share and read a poem that they wrote. Okay, this poem is called To the Oppressor. Now you are strong, but we are but grapes aching with ripeness. Crush us, squeeze from us all the brave life contained in these full skins. But ours is a subtle strength, potent with centuries of yearning, of being kegged and shut away in dark forgotten places. We shall endure to steal your senses in that lonely twilight of your winter's grief. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the intersectionality between, or not intersectionality, what Pauli Murray means to us and why we think that they are a very important figure. So we think that Pauli is important to us because they show how there is, was, and can be intersectionality between the church and social justice. Typically, these two things aren't traditionally seen together, but by seeing Pauli Murray using their voice in both topics, they can help us understand that the two might not be as different as we thought, and that we should use our collective voice that we've gathered here to not only reflect on old traditions and teachings, but to help create new ideas and policies as well. More than anything, Pauli Murray's story highlights how the church should work together with social justice movements and strive to repair things that are broken, just like the Bible speaks about loving thy neighbor and about creating peace between people. Should we play the video now?
Yeah.
So next we have the full video, which is Ruth Bader Ginsburg talking about how Pauli Murray was one of her heroes.
Okay, let me pull that up.
You'll want to
Okay.
make sure you optimize the sound for it too when you share with the video.
Yeah, I need to find. Do you want to? I just have to find the. Sorry. Okay.
Take your time. It gives us time to think.
Thank you. Okay. Here it is.
Did you see the picture of
Can you hear
Paulie
that?
Murray's class at Howard? With the lone woman? When did I first become aware of Paulie Murray? In the summer of 1958. I was engaged as a summer associate in a law firm, and I was taken to meet the lone woman associate, Paulie Murray. I thought she was remarkable. She had written the book about her family, Proud Shoes, and I had read that, so I knew a little bit about Paulie. My closest affiliation with her was when she was on the board of the ACLU. I saw her working at her office in Paul Weiss, but that was just fleeting as I was going down the corridor. The 14th Amendment contains my favorite clause of the Constitution: nor shall any state deny any person the equal protection of the laws. Paulie had the idea that we should interpret the text literally. It said any person, not any male person. She wrote this remarkable article called Jane Crow and the Law, where she called attention to all the laws that restricted what women could do. But unlike race discrimination, they were all rationalized as favors for the ladies. For example, women were not permitted to serve on juries. It was thought that would distract them from their responsibility at home. The idea of Jane Crow was to show that classifications dividing the world up that way were not benign. They did not operate benignly in women's favor. Years later, Justice Brennan put it very well. He said, the pedestal on which women were thought to stand, more often than not, turns out to be a cage. Reed v. Reed was the turning point gender discrimination case in the Supreme Court.
Next is number 4, Reed against Reed.
Sally Reed's case was ideal to open the court's eyes. The case on the facts was heartrending. The law was as arbitrary as it could be. Males must be preferred to females.
The actual wording of the 14th Amendment is very simple. The case itself presents a large and I think significant problem.
I wrote the brief in Sally Reed's case. I put on the cover Paulie Murray's name. By the time of Reed, Paulie had already changed her interest. She was going to divinity school. She was into ministry, not lawyering. But we knew when we were writing that brief that we were standing on her shoulders, because she was the one that sparked the idea that the 14th Amendment should protect the right of men and women, boys and girls, should let them be free to be you and me. That is, to follow their talent as far as it could take them. Unlike Paulie, who was way ahead of her times, I was there at the right time. We owed so much to her courage, to her willingness to speak out when society was not prepared to listen.
Okay, so I think that was all that we had, but we can answer questions now if people have them. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, first, I'd like to thank both of you for this just amazing presentation. I learned things today that I was not aware of, the impact and the significance of her life and what she brought to this country through being in the forefront of who she was and being true to herself, and then the work she did to advance civil rights and as important for women as well. And being an Episcopalian and you know, moving from sort of the secular into her faith and being moved by that, it's just amazing. I just want to thank both you and Livi for this.
Thank you. Yeah, Grandma.
Actually, Aunt Allison, wow, this is fabulous. I actually teach about the 14th Amendment, and I had no idea about Paulie. So now I've got to bring this into my class at Emory. So thank you so much for introducing us. And I'm curious, how did you find out about her? Because I've been taking notes over here, and now I'm going to have to change how I teach this. So thank you and no thank you at the same time, but now I have work to do. But how did you find out about Paulie? Because this is an amazing story that I am a little distressed that I never heard this before. How did I not hear this? So how did you know about her, Louella and Livi? Because this is fabulous.
So Dan presented us with a list of figures that we could choose from, but Paulie caught my eye, I think, because of their relationship with gender. And I thought that that was really interesting, so I wanted to explore more about their experience.
Well, what a great choice. You might have picked the most interesting person in the world, it sounds like. So thank you, and thanks for introducing this person to me, because I feel a little like irritated I didn't know about her, but thankful that you have now introduced me to her. So thank you.
Yeah, I think not many people really knew about her, but now there's like a documentary coming out about her, and so she's kind of getting more of the recognition now. So I don't think you're the only one. I definitely hadn't heard of her before Dan gave us the people. So
I have a question. Did you and Livi find out when you were researching this how it was that Paulie came to the ministry? Had she been a lifelong Episcopalian and it just finally came to the fore in her? Or did she have like a conversion experience, or do you know?
I'm not sure about like the religion in her childhood or anything, but I did hear somewhere that they said that she wanted to like make change. And at first that she thought that the way that she could do that was by becoming a lawyer. And so that's why she got all those degrees. And then she realized that like the best way that she could find to make the change was to connect with faith. I think I heard somewhere about that. And so that's why she switched her paths to ministry.
Try to go through people's hearts.
Yes.
Cool. Interesting. Wow.
So I want to jump in here because I had the privilege of being there with Albert, Dan, and your mother when you stood before the bishop to be confirmed. And the charge that he gave you, you are living into it, because he said to you, after learning of the things you did with Black Lives Matter and the outreach and fundraisers that you were doing, and he said, you know, he's charging you and the youth to make the change that is so necessary within the church. And you and Liv have done that today by reaching out and bringing information to us that we did not know. It's just amazing. So I just wanted to say once again, thank you. And I hope the bishop hears about this work that the two of you have done, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Record it and send it to him. That was your homework assignment and you did it.
Oh, thank you, Wendy.
Anyone else have any questions?
No, I just wanted to say I appreciate it. I was a little late coming in, and you're never too old to learn. So I congratulate these two young ladies. I hope they continue to bring us knowledge that is so important for all of us. So I thank them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just
going to ask
go ahead.
It's just interesting that she was the only woman lawyer at Paul Weiss. I mean, do you know more about, I mean, she was really determined and I mean, that was huge. And she was a person of color and I'm sorry, pronouns correct here. And they were, themselves. So do you know about more about that side of her?
Well, I'm not sure, but I know like it was like very, I guess not radical, I don't know, but it was very like you said, she was the only woman, and then also I think the only African American to get the degree from Yale. But I knew that she was like, didn't always work out. Like I said, she wanted to go to Harvard, but she didn't get in there. And I think she had like references from these famous women. I think one of them was Eleanor Roosevelt and other famous women, but they thought that the references were from women who were like too out there, I guess, and who were actually fighting for change. So that was part of the reason why she didn't get in, was because her references were from people who, I think that's right, who were like, radical women, I guess, at the time. But that is a good question. I'm not really sure.
But she must have gotten turned down a lot of times, so she must have just kept pushing and pursuing what she really wanted to do, which is amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
Louella and Livi, thank you so much for this. Let me ask a question about when will the documentary be produced? It would be interesting to maybe have some special St. Paul showing of that together.
Do you know?
I can look that up right now. Let me see.
I know that it was shown at the Sundance Festival, so probably soon, because it was at that festival, and I think that is for movies and documentaries that are coming out soon, so I'm assuming not too far away. But I guess Livy's looking that up.
Yeah, I found here, I think it came out on January 31st.
Okay, so yeah, it was shown at the festival, but
but
they were sold out. We couldn't get tickets to it because it was sold out. But yeah, I mean that's a good thing, I guess, because people are learning about it. But yeah.
Yeah.
So is it easy to get a copy of it, or how does it work? Could we buy a copy? Could we, how do we get a license to show it?
It says here that it had its world premiere at the festival, but I'm not actually sure if that means that it's been distributed yet. So I think I might have to like look around a little bit more, but I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, it'd be great to kind of just say, hey, let's do a special showing. Let's choose a date that would be appropriate and share this great story with more people.
We could get back to you on how that would be possible.
I bet a lot of us would come to that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Liv, of this, in working on this, what was one thing that you took away from about they? I'm going to use the right there. What did you take away from, what was the one thing?
This was like less of like a fact, but more of like an emotional thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've seen a lot of figures that have been both very involved in the church and spirituality and like pushing for change. So it was actually really inspiring for me to see someone combine both of these aspects into their identity. And I thought that was really interesting and eye-opening for me.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anyone else?
I was just looking up online about, it says that the film has been acquired by Amazon Studios, so that suggests that it will be coming out commercially. But then I just checked Amazon Prime and it isn't listed. So yeah, so but we can watch for that. So
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that and see if it comes out on Amazon anytime soon.
good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Louella and Livi for the time they put in and just their thoughtfulness around just sharing with us about this historic figure. We have one other figure we want to discuss today. It is National Women's Month in March, and two, we wanted. I think we called this whole lecture "Hidden Figures," and there was that movie that came out a couple of years ago about the famous mathematicians who helped develop, things I think around the space program that we had never heard of. They were kind of forgotten in history. And I think that's true in the Episcopal Church as well. Not just our church, a lot of churches and in a lot of parts of society. And we're in this exciting time in history where we get to explore and discover what that means. And so, there can be this thing where we really celebrate Black History Month and then forget about Black figures the rest of the year. And this is a way for us to say, hey, Black History Month may be over, but we need to be talking about Black saints, Black important figures in history as a model for us and how we think about how we live as a community. And it ties in real nicely with women of faith as well. During our Absalom Jones Day service, we read a special Prayers of the People developed by the Reverend Jamon Taylor. And Reverend Taylor is the rector of St. Ambrose. It's a historically Black congregation in Raleigh, North Carolina, founded in 1868. And it intentionally incorporates Afrocentric icons and art, lively jazz-inspired music, and inclusive prayers. And they have permanent recognition in their church on needlepoint kneelers to Raleigh native Anna Julia Cooper, the Reverend Paulie Murray, who we talked about today, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, and other Black Americans who are commemorated in the Episcopal Church's calendar of saints as a way to disrupt or separate Christianity from a legacy of white supremacy. And that's what Jamon Taylor recently said in an article published by the Episcopal News Service. And I want to share a little bit of his story before we continue. He says, it's challenging to become what you cannot see. And he's talking about his youth in an historically Black Episcopal congregation in his hometown of Louisburg, North Carolina, where there was prominent European images, formational materials, clergy teaching and preaching. And he said that the liturgies did more to reinscribe racism than disrupt it. Worship is central to who we are as Episcopalians, and that worship tends to replicate the very thing that we teach against, racism and white supremacy. And he said when he was in college as an engineering student at North Carolina State University, he took a random, elective on intertestamental literature, which is this 2-century period between the composition of the Old Testament and the New Testament. And he discovered for the first time Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. And he said it radically changed his perspective. He said, I went to my residence hall and did an internet search on Ethiopia and the Book of Enoch, and the website for St. Mary of Zion Church in Washington, D.C. came up. And there was an image of Mary and the Christ child. And I stared at that image for 10 minutes because it was the first time I saw a truly authentic African representation of the Holy Family. Everything before that that looked like the Da Vinci paintings, but with brown skin. And here I saw people who look like me. He says, I did some more research and found that Christianity came to the Horn in North Africa, not through European slave traders and colonialists, but through Jerusalem. I began using the term indigenous African Christianity. It liberated me as someone who grew up in the church, coming of age and wrestling with what it meant to be a Black Christian. And so even though he adopted Ethiopia as a spiritual home, as opposed to Canterbury, he decided to stay in the Episcopal Church. And this really formed his, relationship. It ended up leading him to become a priest. And so one of the reasons we've been trying to talk more about Black saints, and we're having a scholar from our diocese come in to talk about Absalom Jones some more, whom we briefly touched on, back in the Absalom Jones Day service is to really say, how can we highlight these hidden figures who are often forgotten, sometimes intentionally, a lot of times more passively, and how can we begin to see the saints as a way to look at God in a light that's different than what we're used to, a way that represents the divine image of God in ways that we're not traditionally used to. And so, as you can see, we're doing this in our youth program through the confirmation class, but we're also trying to do it through our godly play program. And so I'm going to share, we just heard about a story of the first Black female Episcopal priest, and now we're going to show a story of the first Black female bishop. One second, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Miss Sarah, and I'm going to share a story with you today. At the end of the story, there will be some questions. You'll know the questions are coming because they'll start with, I wonder. These questions are the kind where there's no right or wrong answer. You might hear a question and just know what the answer is. There might be another question that you have many answers to. And maybe there will be a question you don't have any answers to, or maybe you don't even understand the question. And all of that is okay. You can say as many or as few answers as you have. If you're watching with someone else, you might even have different answers than the other person has, and that's okay too. So, let's get ourselves ready to enter the story.
This is the story of Bishop Barbara Harris. We remember her during the time of the color purple. Purple is the color of Lent, but it is also the color that bishops wear. It helps us remember that she was a bishop. A bishop cares for and guides priests and people in a big place called a diocese. Bishops carry a shepherd's staff called a crozier to show that they are trying their best to be a good shepherd to the people. Not everyone thought that a woman could be a bishop. Many others thought, why not? In those days, it was still unusual in the United States for an African American to be a bishop. But again, many thought, why not? This Black woman bishop worked as hard as anyone to care for and guide the people in her diocese. She cared most for those she called the least, the lost, and the left out. When Barbara was growing up, her mother played the organ at St. Barnabas Episcopal Church, an African-American church in Philadelphia. The whole family loved music. Her mother took care of other people's laundry to help pay for Barbara's piano and singing lessons. Barbara especially loved the old hymns she heard and sang in church. When Barbara grew up, she loved to play the piano and sing the hymns she now knew by heart. Even when she was just talking to people or preaching in a church, the words from hymns filled up her talking. Barbara loved to go to church and helped teach Sunday school, work with the youth, and even took people from her church to March for Freedom with Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma, Alabama. She also spent her Sunday afternoons praying and talking with people who were in jail. Barbara didn't become a priest until she was 50 years old, so what she said and did had been thought about for a long time. She was a small person who did big things. The power behind you is greater than any obstacle ahead of you. Barbara carried with her a small piece of paper to help her do what had to be done. It gave her courage and hope. It said, "The power behind you is greater than any obstacle ahead of you." She knew that with God, she could do anything. When Bishop Barbara became old and full of years, she died. People celebrated her life and remembered her as the first woman bishop in her part of the Christian church. But they also knew that she always worked hard for others, especially for the least, the lost, and the left out. I wonder, what part of Bishop Barbara's story do you like the best? I wonder what part of the story is most important. I wonder what part of the story is about you, or where you might be in this story. I wonder if we could leave out any part of this story and still have all of the story that we need.
And so it's interesting. We watched this story a couple weeks ago during the Absalom Jones Day service, and now we're watching it again, but in light, now there's this other layer with Reverend Paulie Murray. And I just want to ask some of those wondering questions. As you think about the story that Louella and Livi told earlier today and the story that Sarah just told, I wonder what part of the story you like the best.
I like the fact that both of them worked very hard to help other persons. They didn't just stay within themselves and say, oh, I have this knowledge and I can, think about it. But Paulie decided that she was going to work for others, and we see down the road that it came back into the Supreme Court and all the different cases there. And some of those things are still being raised today about the 14th Amendment and individuals' rights and things of that nature. And with Bishop Harris, she really caught Hades, because individuals were saying, well, why is she being ordained as a bishop? She hasn't even gone to seminary. So she really caught heck, being a bishop, being female, and being a person of a certain orientation. She really caught some trouble.
Thanks for sharing, Pam. Anyone else? What part of these stories did you like the best?
I think for me, it was the matter that both of them lived full lives and had careers, and at some point decided that they wanted to enter into becoming priests and ultimately living a life in a faith community at a later age in their life. So it's never too late. Both were probably in their 50s or more. And so I found that something that struck me, that resonated with me.
Thanks, Van.
I think they both had, of course, tremendous courage, and they also had to be confrontational, to move the social agenda forward. So, two amazing women. Thank you.
I think, oh yeah, also Van, Paulie was in their 60s when they went to it, so yeah. But I think that that my favorite part was that they both used the influence that they had for good and to help people, and they were like the head of congregations or even the diocese, I guess, but they used the influence that they had to make change. And even if they didn't in their lifetime, the changes weren't made. Like, I don't think the case that Paulie helped with was decided, but Paulie's influence helped the people who were fighting for that even after they died. Even though they wouldn't see it in their lifetime, it still helped in the future.
Thanks, Louella. I wonder what part of this story is the most important to you?
This is Louise. To me, it's that they never gave up. They never gave up, even though they weren't going to see massive change. And that tells me that those fighting for change now, it can be small changes, but you can't give up,
I agree with Louise. It's as almost as we watch the voter restrictions being brought up in Pennsylvania, Georgia, all this, the things that, or the kinds of things that these wonderful women would have fought for, obviously Rosa Parks did. You can't give up. You have to keep fighting. And that's what Louise said. It just, you think you made it and somebody comes up and going to try to knock you back. Keep fighting.
That's a good example.
And it's interesting that they chose the religion rather than the law. So I guess law has some, there's some caps on that. Because you have to win by a better argument than somebody else's argument, rather than, though I did read that University of Pennsylvania's lawyer, there's a teacher there, a law professor who wants a whole new way of doing cases where it's by facts only. And I think I got rid of the article, but I should find that for you all, because it's maybe somebody at Penn knows about. I went to Penn, so I get the Gazette and I read these things, but it's a fascinating thing that maybe our law hasn't been good enough. I mean, that's a horrible thing to say, but Penn's working on that. Because, it is all cases are won by who has the best heart, who's the best orator, can win the case, and not maybe about justice always, not what the facts are. So religion maybe is the better route.
What impressed me was the way that little piece of paper with that phrase, "The power behind you is stronger than that which is opposing you." I mean, it's interesting to think about what are the little things that we carry around physically or in our heads that inspire us, give us that courage to keep showing up, and so that's something that stuck with me.
Thanks for sharing. I wonder what part of this story is about you.
I'm a little reluctant to talk about this, but I'll tell you what's about me. When in the 60s, when I was in college at Swarthmore College, it was the first civil rights demonstrations and all that. And I went on several demonstrations. I sat in at a lunch counter in Maryland, the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And then when I came back from the Peace Corps, I went on an anti-Vietnam War demonstration. And all Nixon did was put school buses all around the White House, and we ran into the school buses and went home. And I got very discouraged and disillusioned with protesting and so on. And I think now, that shows people how you think, but like these ladies taught us, you just have to keep trying, and maybe you try a different way. Maybe protests are just not for me. But I got to do it some other way. Got to keep pushing. Got to keep pushing. Thank you for letting us tell you our stories.
Thanks for sharing that, Louise, and for all of you sharing your stories.
I'd say for me, it's about not letting age be a deterrent in moving forward. And what Stephen had reminded me of that John Lewis said, not being afraid to make and having the courage to make good trouble, stirring it up for the good. And for me, I know I sometimes have a reluctance to put myself out there. So that's what I heard it for me in this.
I wonder what part of this story, either of these stories or both of them, we could leave out and still have all of the story that we need.
I think every story always leaves something out. There's a subset that in this story, and we could take a subset of the subset. Maybe something's always left out, it seems, and often by the teller, which is fine, which I think is why it's good. I vicariously followed along with Louella and Livi while they were doing this project. And I think I can say one of the more challenging parts, probably for Louella, was integrating all the stories because they all didn't completely line up. It's not that they were contradictory, but even in the end, Louella had to leave some things out. And it's a very hard decision to know what to leave out and what to put in. I think every time we tell a story, it's often harder to figure out what to leave out. But there's always something that's left out. And sometimes that's difficult.
Thanks, Bob. I think there's, yeah, that's very thoughtful. Well, thank you so much for supporting our students and for supporting this forum. And I hope today you got to get a little bit of a sense of how Christian formation is on a continuum. You know, you enter this community through baptism and you go through godly play, you're in confirmation, you're a youth, and then you're here in adult education, still learning, still becoming a priest or a bishop, even in old age, you know? And so it's wonderful to be able to share these stories and get a snapshot of what we're doing as an entire community in formation. And it's action oriented, it's contemplative, and it's focused on God, and it's focused on people. And so thank you for supporting the hard work that Louella and Livi put in today.
And thank you for leading there.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time.